You are now listening to the FortCast, brought to you by JBJ Management. The FortCast is produced and edited by John Christopher Edmonds and written by Austin Hood and Jonah Murray.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome to the FortCast, your source for all things Fort Worth and Tarrant County. Born and raised in the Fort, I'm your host, Jonah Murray. This week, we cover the most worthy news from November 22nd to December 6th. But first, we are going to welcome a very special guest, Dr. Green. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joanne Green. She is a political scientist and professor at Texas Christian University who specializes in studying gender and politics, campaigns and elections, and American politics. So she's also been integral in the TCU Women and Gender Studies program ever since she arrived in 1994, which was also the first year that program started, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, awesome. So in my experience, Dr. Green is a very talented educator and a wonderful mentor. And so I'm really excited to have one of the smartest and most passionate people on this podcast today to, talk about SB 8.
Yeah, talk about a very timely issue right now. So
yes,
it's great. Glad to have you with us, Dr. Green.
Well, thanks for that very nice introduction. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So since so much of your work, Dr. Green, focuses on feminism and women in politics, Austin and I wanted to ask you to share your thoughts about the Texas Senate Bill 8, or SB 8, which bans abortions after the detection of a heartbeat, which is around the 5 to 6 week mark. So could you give us just a quick kind of overview of, why... Sorry, let me rephrase that. So it bans abortions around the detection of a heartbeat 5 to 6 weeks. And according to the Star Tribune, about 50% of abortions have decreased in Texas since its passing. So could you talk a little bit about why that is, why that might be?
Well, 50% of abortions being conducted in Texas have decreased. That doesn't necessarily mean that 50% fewer women are terminating pregnancies. So I think that's an important distinction to be made because it's a remarkably significant piece of legislation, because just knowing human anatomy, many women don't detect that they are pregnant or know for certain until actually right around this point of time. Frequently, I myself have been pregnant twice, and the second time it was intentional. So I was excited and took pregnancy tests, this happened? And I knew immediately. The first time was an accidental pregnancy, and I didn't realize, oh, wow, my period is a little bit late. And by the time you realize your period is late and you get a pregnancy test and then you go and get tested, then you realize at that point, in fact, that you are pregnant and already at the cusp, if not past that state, particularly noting that not all women cycle in highly predictive ways. And so the idea that everybody cycles in a 28-day cycle, and so therefore they would and they all monitor it, and they automatically would know if they're a day late, and then they would automatically get a pregnancy test and know immediately, and therefore have 1 week to decide, which is really an insufficient amount of time, even under those scenarios. And so this compressed period of time really represents a dramatic change in women's healthcare options. And I think it's important to really look at this as a healthcare option, because this really is a significant impact on the range of healthcare choices that women have regarding their own bodies. And so this is a substantial shift in things. And I don't know that it necessarily results in necessarily half of women now choosing to continue with pregnancies. What that means is they're having to seek alternative methods. Like, for instance, border states have reported a large surge in women from Texas traveling there to seek terminations because they discovered that they were pregnant and or couldn't get the resources together that were necessary to pay for terminations, because women have to pay for these out of pocket. And for a lot of lower income women, this is a substantial amount of money that they often have to save their paychecks for. And so by the time they get their resources together and then get enough money, they often have to travel out of state. So I think we have to be careful about what kind of statistics we look at, because some people who are who really do want to end terminations look at this as a mark of success. What this really could just be is an additional financial burden for women seeking a variety of healthcare choices. So I think we have to kind of look at how we frame some of the data and the statistics and the consequences thereof.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point about you can't just state the number. It doesn't necessarily speak for itself. The decrease, but why has that decrease happened, and where did those other 50% go? And like you said, they haven't just disappeared; they've just gone to other places. So yeah, I think that really is significant. And you mentioned the financial burden as well. So how do you see this bill affecting the well-being of people in our local community? Obviously financially, but in any other ways?
Well, yeah, I was just, I mentor, I mentor a number of students, and I've mentored a number of students who have found themselves to be unexpectedly pregnant. And several of them, come from means. And so the termination choices for them and the factors that influence their termination choices are often very different from the factors that influence students of without means. And even the decision of if they decide to terminate, how are they going to pay for the procedure? And so I had a student who, I didn't know this until afterward, but was really having financial difficulties and was having to save up her money for weeks because the other person involved in the inception was no longer involved any longer. And so she was alone. And so she had to save up her money. She had to get extra hours. And so it took her almost a month to get enough money to be able to pay for her, because she doesn't have a family to support her either. Mm-hmm. And so when you start looking at how this impacts people, you have to really look at it from not necessarily your own world experience, like what this would be like if you got unexpectedly pregnant or somebody you love got unexpectedly pregnant, but you have to look at it as from, the lens of what it would mean to other people who might not be as privileged. To, for instance, traveling out of state is really an enormous hardship. It's a hardship already just to pay for a termination locally, but to actually then add the extra cost of taking off time from work. They might not have transportation to get somebody to drive them, the hotel. Some of our border states have also have very significant restrictions on abortions, which sometimes require that they have to return because they have certain mandates that you can't get the abortion all in one visit. So you have to go and then return the next day. So we're talking about significant financial burdens. And this law also didn't come with any kind of accompanying support to make these choices easier. So, for instance, there wasn't any legislation that, for instance, had paid leave for women who are now being encouraged and or mandated to continue with these pregnancies. One of the biggest reasons women terminate pregnancies is because they can't afford to have another child. But there's been no concurrent legislation to make it easier, for instance, for women to afford to have these to continue with these pregnancies. And so when you think about like the economic well-being, the mental well-being, how this impacts young women who are still pursuing their education, there's profound implications for people, both on the individual level and then on the community level, because it has disparate impacts on different groups of people in ways that really could set back a lot of gains that have been made, particularly in educational gains, and then the subsequent economic gains that we've had in the last 50 years.
Right. Yeah. Austin, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'd like to quickly talk about the enforcement mechanism of this bill. This is a very unique way of doing it, removing the state out of much of the enforcement piece of that. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, it's really interesting and novel because, well, just thinking about, first of all, the state almost universally enforces our laws. And that's part of the contract we have with the state is we defer to the state a certain amount of our responsibility and our rights and privileges in order to keep to advance certain policy goals, like, for instance, the ability to keep us safe. So we give to the state the responsibility of maintaining the safety of our roads. And we all agree that the state has the ability and responsibility to maintain that. So even though I think, for instance, I have really quick reflexes and I personally should be allowed to drive 65 miles an hour within the city, I don't drive 65 miles within the city, both because I fear prison and also because I do, in fact, respect human life. And so we acknowledge the state has that responsibility as part of our protection of human life. And so, but this is very interesting in that the state is essentially yielding its authority and its responsibility in enforcing this law in a very interesting dynamic, because then the question becomes, will they yield their responsibility in the enforcement of other laws? Or is this the only area? And if this is the only area, why is this the only area? Why is it the regulations of women's health care the only area in which the state is saying, we're going to yield our responsibility in enforcing this law? Why aren't there other areas that we could? So for instance, if you're like, there's liability that's now people are arguing that there ought to be more liability for people that parents of school shooters. We saw with this Michigan case,
right?
And so perhaps like we should, some states might then say, well, maybe we ought to allow neighbors to start doing, maybe the state can't enforce these laws, and maybe we need to have the states the states aren't doing a good job in protecting us against gun violence. Maybe we ought to yield that responsibility to the citizens to start to try to have more responsibility in ensuring our schools are safe. And maybe we need to have some vigilantes outside of the school searching backpacks. So at what point, like, where do we draw the line of allowing citizens to take the responsibility of the government? Is it in what policy areas? And so I think this really represents some significant shifts. If it's only for women's health, then the question is, why only this policy area? If it's other areas, then the question is, where does the line draw? It gets quite dangerous if you start thinking about where this could go.
Yeah. So since the government has kind of yielded that responsibility, in the Supreme Court right now, we're watching as this Mississippi case goes through about the Mississippi abortion law. And there's talk of it possibly overturning Roe v. Wade. Can SB 8 potentially avoid those kind of federal precedents because this is not a government enforcement kind of procedure?
Well, that's what the Supreme Court is being asked to decide, whether or not the enforcement mechanism precludes the federal government from examining it. And I think it's a challenge, it's a legal challenge to determine this element of it. And how they decide this will be of great importance because of the questions I raised. Because, I mean, you could imagine, like, this is one area that, policymakers have decided, but this could grow into many other different policy areas. And if they use the same enforcement mechanism, what they're essentially saying is that the federal government would have no mechanism for enforcing, like, for instance, constitutional standards. And that's really hard to really envision, because that's a very dangerous role for federalism, because that really does bring up the idea of the supremacy of federal law, federal constitution, our constitutional rights. What does that mean for the idea that there are certain rights that are guaranteed to individuals regardless of where they reside? So, because there could be, for instance, right now it's done by a conservative state legislature, but liberal state legislatures could do the same thing. So this could be an infringement of many different rights if we continue to go down this road.
Yeah, and so in Texas specifically with this law, how do you see it impacting the future of specifically reproductive healthcare rights?
Well, if it's considered, if this is allowed to hold up, then it's a significant infringement on, significantly change the landscape for reproductive rights in Texas, largely eliminating the ability to terminate a pregnancy, but for a few people who have early detection or that qualify for abortions because of significant danger to the life of the woman. And even those are very rare exceptions. And so it would completely change the landscape entirely.
Right. And so here in Tarrant County as well, we have 3 senators who represent our general area, districts 9, 10, and 12.
To be clear, state senators.
Yes, state senators. Yes, state senators. Kelly Hancock, Beverly Powell, and Jane Nelson. And these representatives passed SB 8 2-1. So I was wondering, do you think that kind of 2-1 vote represents Tarrant County's feelings on this bill accurately?
I haven't seen the data for Tarrant County. Now, going off of the fact that of the voting behavior for Tarrant County for the last 2 federal elections, indicating Tarrant County is becoming more liberal in its voting, and when I know about that as a predictive of how people would feel about this law. So once again, I don't have I haven't seen data about Tarrant County, but using the predictive measures of everything I know about how Tarrant County is increasingly voting and how people who vote this way generally feel about this issue, I would have to say, no, it doesn't appear to be in line whatsoever with Tarrant County. And it's definitely not, this bill is not in line with the public at all. But it's in line with the people that are elected to represent us. And there's a variety of reasons that the Texas state legislature is not representative of the Texas population. Dramatic and significant partisan gerrymandering has resulted in districts in which we are not having very competitive elections. There's often a facade of competition, but really there isn't. There is more extreme polarization within both political parties, but notably within the Republican Party. And we are getting more conservative Republicans that are being elected, and they aren't necessarily representative of the population. They're not necessarily even representative of the rank and file Republicans, but they're certainly not representative of the average Texas voter. So this policy is not supported by the majority of the population. But nevertheless, it is supported obviously by the majority of the legislature and the governor.
And do you have any idea of kind of what that legislator's motivation for this law was? Like, what is their end goal with this?
Oh, well, there's the absolute belief that they're protecting the sanctity of human life, the belief that human life begins at conception, and they are protecting human life. And so the goal is to end terminations. The goal is to end abortions.
Okay, gotcha. And again, that kind of leads me back to thinking about, 50% cut in abortions, but they're not just gone. They're happening in other places.
Well, they are, but there is a significant reduction in abortions. That's certainly for the case, because not everybody can travel out of state. So on any measure, if you are advancing a pro-life agenda in which you believe that that the fetus is a human life, this bill is successful. You have substantially reduced the number of terminations. It's expected to continue to reduce the number of terminations. And you might hope that in the future, you could have even more stringent laws that would perhaps even criminalize termination. So this is a giant step forward in the road to eliminating abortions in the United States. I mean, that is the underlying goal.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that insight. Austin, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, just one more follow-up question. Going back to the elections portion of this, do you see that this issue would be significant coming into both the primaries of March next year and all the way till the general election in November? Do you see this as a staying power, as an issue?
Yeah, it's going to be an issue. And you need to understand it's an issue on both sides. This is going to galvanize the pro-life movement, and it could be one of those things. It'll be interesting to see how this folds out, because you have to look at like the history of the pro-choice movement too, because after Roe versus Wade, and they felt like they had won, they really got into a situation where they became very lackadaisical and weren't as organized. And so whether or not the pro-life groups go through this in states where they have these significant legislative victories. So it could be that some of their supporters think, well, we won, and so they're not going to be as, like, I think in the next election they'll be as vocalized and participatory. But in the future, it could be that they consider this to be, decided policy, and they could get a little lackadaisical, like the pro-choice feminists did, particularly in the 80s and 90s. But that might not happen. Certainly in the next election, the pro-choice and is going to try to mobilize this, and particularly noting within the Democratic Party. I think this is also could stimulate turnout for Republicans, because a lot of people do support this bill. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people who oppose this, but there's also a lot of support. So you're going to have to look at, when you talk about elections, you kind of have to look at what's going on within the Republican Party separately than what's going on within the Democratic Party. Within the Republican Party, this law is popular. And so this might manifest itself in ways to reward people who supported it, and to reinforce a particular paradigm. Within the Democratic Party, it certainly is going to be a campaign issue in which it will mobilize supporters. It's going to mobilize groups. It will absolutely be present in campaign ads. It's going to be, they're going to use this as a campaign issue as much as they possibly can to try to stimulate turnout, which normally in midterm elections is lower. So this will absolutely be a campaign issue, particularly given when the Supreme Court decision will likely come out next summer, right, when most of the public is starting to actually pay attention to the midterm elections, will be right about when the Supreme Court decision comes. And given what it looked like from the oral arguments, it should stimulate both sides pretty well.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Green. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank
you. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye.
So, Austin, we just heard from Dr. Green about SB 8. Could you give us a local government and politics update?
Yes. Last podcast, we talked a bit about redistricting throughout the state and here locally. And the Redistricting Commission is actually going to be taking a break for December. So all of those public meetings have now been pushed to January. So be on the lookout for those as they are going to be wanting public input for the new city district maps. And as a reminder, there will be 2 new city council members that will be added to the city council for the next election. These maps are definitely important to make sure that your community is represented as these maps are being drawn. So be on the lookout from the city websites for when those January meetings will be. And the city council has also probably pushed their schedule back a little bit as well. So I think these won't be approved until a little bit later next year.
Yeah, I believe we're looking at the end of February for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Awesome. And also, I think I just heard this morning that Texas as a whole is being sued for redistricting. Is that statewide?
Yes. So that is the Department of Justice is suing us based on our statewide maps here. And this is actually the first year that we are outside of the Voting Rights Act, when the Supreme Court took us out of the pre-clearance. Some of the southern states had to be in pre-clearance. So this is kind of the way that the Department of Justice is now going to have to come back in and see after the fact, what our maps look like, and they're going to be arguing to the federal judges that they are discriminatory. So these things will take a while to get through the court system, and we will have to wait and see if these maps stand as they are drawn now.
Okay, but as for now, those maps are what we're dealing with for the midterm elections?
Yes. We know that the filing deadline is for primaries is going to be December 13th, so just right around the corner, and the primaries are still set for March 1st. We will see if these maps still stand. The time to change that or push that election back is quickly running out, but for right now, we are sticking with our original calendar.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Good to know. So, up next, we have our worthy news. First up, I have some health and safety headlines. Get your COVID vaccination or booster for free at the Bob Bolin Center in Fort Worth. The CDC has approved boosters for everyone 18 and up, as far as I know. And so at the Bob Bolin Center in Fort Worth, that's 505 West Felix Street, they're open from 9 to 6, Monday through Friday. And in the month of December, they're only closed on December 24th and 31st for those holidays. So,
Okay. Are they open on the weekends at all, or is it just during
Monday
the week?
through Friday.
Okay, just Monday through
Yep.
Friday.
9 to 6. So, also, as the winter is setting in, make sure you know what to do to stay safe and warm during the season. The Star Telegram has reported that ERCOT is at a high risk of power outages this year for 4 out of 5 likely weather situations. So please plan ahead and stay safe.
Unpleasant news for all of us that very recently went through that just last February. So
Yes.
yeah, I know that a lot of people, that's going to be recent in their memory. People might be stocking up on some water, and making sure that they've got a couple of those needed supplies at home.
Yep, getting extra blankets to black out your windows.
Batteries and yeah.
Yes, yeah. My power was out for about 4 days.
Whoa.
Yeah. It
Okay.
was not fun.
Then I will not be complaining here. I will be quiet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that was a really scary time. So, hopefully no winter storms, but I guess we'll see.
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
All right, next up in worthy news is an unfortunate robbery. Just a few weeks ago, Berry Good Buys resale store was robbed of over $1,300. So, if you don't know, Berry Good Buys supports Safe Haven, which is a local nonprofit in Fort Worth that supports women and children who are victims of domestic violence. And I mean, I've whenever I can, I donate to Very Good Buys. I know that it's a very reputable source in our community, so
Mhm.
I was really upset to hear that this happened. But the good news is that they are still accepting donations. So they're accepting monetary donations through their website, or you can also drop off necessary items like clothing and toiletries at they're set up at a location currently. It's 1424 Hemphill Street in Fort Worth. So, if you have anything extra that you're cleaning out of your closets, I know I do. So that's a really great place to support.
Yeah, definitely an awful thing to hear about, especially during this holiday season. But hopefully, the community comes back out to support them and to lift them back up during this hard and troubling time for them.
Yes. s- Um, and Yeah, it's if you don't know where Berry Goodbyes is, it's located on Berry Street, and it's right near TCU and Pascal High School.
Okay, okay. I definitely passed it then. Now that I'm
Mhm.
thinking about it, 'Cause, yeah, I've been up and down Berry Street more than a couple times.
Yes, yeah, it's a very known location, so sad to hear about that, but please do support it if you can. Um, and also speaking of helping out during the holidays, this leads us perfectly into our life and culture section for this week. So, we're going to talk about holiday resources in Fort Worth. So, the holidays are an exciting time for many, but it can also be challenging, especially if you don't have resources like food, shelter, clothing, or for those who struggle with mental health as well. So, I wanted to take some time to extend some knowledge and resources, and if you're able, ways to help out our community this holiday season. So, first, if you struggle with mental health, I want to remind you to take a breath and that it's okay to give yourself space and feel the things you're feeling. Our bodies are really, really amazing things, and something that helps me a lot is if I'm having an anxiety response, to remember that that's just my body trying to protect me from something. So giving yourself the grace to kind of feel that, whatever it is an important step in moving forward. So seeking out support from those you love and trust is definitely something to do, and to remember that mental health is physical health. Your brain is just as much a part of your body as your head, elbows, knees, and toes. So take care of it.
Definitely. I would also like to talk about a little bit about Meals on Wheels. That's something that we as an office have done
Oh, yes.
here, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. It is one of the easiest ways to volunteer. Just over a lunch break, we went out and just delivered some meals throughout our local community. It really was a very short time commitment, but something that really made a difference in dozens of lives, and it was really rewarding to be able to interact, personally with people because sometimes when you give, you don't get to actually see where the benefit of your time and
Yeah.
effort and your money is going. But with Meals on Wheels, that was actually something that we were able to see up close, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think that a lot of us got a lot out of that program, even for just such a short volunteering period.
Mhm.
And Meals on Wheels is probably in your area. It's very close to you, so it's very easy just to sign up. I've got an easy to use app. You can go down, pick up some meals, run during your lunch hour, and then you're good to go.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know that it was that quick that you could just do it in
Oh,
your break
oh yeah,
time.
yeah. And if you can't do lunchtime, they also offer other times when you can actually do some of like the prep work, and you can go and pack all the meals together like in the morning, or I think they might also offer evening times. I'm not totally sure. I'm a lunch person. That's I already struggle enough getting up in the morning as it is, so I'm like,
Me
all right,
too.
I'll do the lunch rush.
Gotcha. All right, cool. And then one last thing that I wanted to mention today was there's an amazing mental health resource in Fort Worth called the Cowtown Clubhouse. They were featured in an article by the Fort Worth Report, and Cowtown Clubhouse is a local community center that basically just provides a safe haven and a support system for adults 18 and over who struggle with mental health. So anyone is allowed to join. It's right now a pretty tight knit community of about 25 people, but it's located at 415 May Street in Fort Worth. And, this article, it had a lot of current members really just singing the praises of this community for helping them, especially during the pandemic time. They would meet on Zoom every day, but now they are back in person.
Mhm.
So they have, a lunch program. Um, they have a garden that people, can tend to and are growing okra and tomatoes and yeah, it's just a really great resource. So if you or a loved one are looking to join a local community, I would definitely recommend Cowtown Clubhouse.
All right, well, that's great. It's great to hear that there's like a local thing for, adults, certainly that maybe, usually wouldn't get that type of, community or group together. I'm glad to hear that that's in the community.
Yeah, it seems like a super great resource. I hadn't heard about it, but I learned all sorts of great things from the Fort Worth Report, which is also a nonprofit news
Oh, there you go.
source. So yeah, good stuff.
All right, well, great. I think that's all I've got.
That's all I've got. Um, yeah, have a good holiday. I'm not. This is coming out near the holidays,
So yes,
so
this is probably it. This is happy holidays
I
right
think
here.
this might be happy holidays right here. Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll see you in the new year, and until next time, remember your worth. See ya.